Today is September the 10th, 1998. We're in Houston, Texas at the 12th Armored Division reunion. My name is Charlie Henson, and I'm speaking to Ron Weller today. He's from B Company of the 56th, and I appreciate you coming. So, like I told you, we're going to start out, and I want to know about your family, your parents, and your brothers and sisters, and where you came from.
Well, I was born and raised in Long Beach, California, and lived there all my life until I was long after I was married, and therefore I went through the schools there and have two sisters, both of them slightly younger than I am, and the parents had come from Iowa in 1919, and in fact my parents were married March 19th, 1919, and came west, settled in Long Beach, and my dad was an electrician, and my mother was fortunate enough to be a housewife the entire time.
Give me your dad's full name and your mom's full name.
Rex A. Weller and Jeanette Ellen Weller.
Okay. What was her maiden name?
Leininger was her maiden name. They both came from southwestern Iowa, near the towns of Diagonal and Creston, which is some 90 miles southwest of Des Moines, and came out of a farm setting where their parents were farmers in both cases and had sold their farms and so forth and so on, and they came west.
They were pioneers, huh?
Yeah, they came in about 1920 or 21 up to Seattle, worked briefly up there for a lumber company, and then came down the coast.
My name is Charlie Henson, and I'm speaking to Ron Weller today. He's from B Company of the 56th, and I appreciate you coming. So, like I told you, we're going to start out, and I want to know about your family, your parents, and your brothers and sisters, and where you came from.
Well, I was born and raised in Long Beach, California, and lived there all my life until I was long after I was married, and therefore I went through the schools there and have two sisters, both of them slightly younger than I am, and the parents had come from Iowa in 1919, and in fact my parents were married March 19th, 1919, and came west, settled in Long Beach, and my dad was an electrician, and my mother was fortunate enough to be a housewife the entire time.
Give me your dad's full name and your mom's full name.
Rex A. Weller and Jeanette Ellen Weller.
Okay. What was her maiden name?
Leininger was her maiden name. They both came from southwestern Iowa, near the towns of Diagonal and Creston, which is some 90 miles southwest of Des Moines, and came out of a farm setting where their parents were farmers in both cases and had sold their farms and so forth and so on, and they came west.
They were pioneers, huh?
Yeah, they came in about 1920 or 21 up to Seattle, worked briefly up there for a lumber company, and then came down the coast with my dad's parents, and had varying experiences. Came over to Ridge Route in the days when it had all kinds of twists and turns in it, and went as far south as San Diego, and it was raining in San Diego, so they backed up to Long Beach, which they had passed through, and they liked that, and they stayed there. Yep.
Okay, you graduated then from Long Beach. And what year did you graduate, and what were your interests in high school?
Well, I graduated in 1940 from high school, and had carried papers for the Long Beach Press Telegram had 2 or 3 routes for several years and whatnot. And my athletic interest was handball at the time, and swimming, which the ocean being right near us, I used to ride the waves and so forth. And that's when they had bodyboards that were long wooden ones, about 11 or 12 feet long and quite wide, remarkably different from what they have now. But anyway, I then went on to City College for 2 years, Long Beach City College. And at the end of that time, I went up to Santa Barbara, which was in the process of becoming a part of the University of California at the time, and was located in Santa Barbara. But they were beginning to build a new school at Goleta, which is about 9 miles north, for the university. So I never attended the university per se, but because it was being integrated at the time with the university from an administrative point of view, my diploma was from the university in 1947 when I graduated. And as I was mentioning to your assistant here, I graduated with a bachelor's in sociology. And one of the professors asked me what I was going to do with it, and at that time, about the only thing you could do with that was become a probation officer, or possibly, if you were intellectually inclined, become a doctorate in sociology with graduate work. But I was not interested that way. And so the professor said, well, I graduated from Columbia University, Teachers College. I just got my doctorate. He says, I have friends back there, and if you would like to go back there to school, I'll help you get in. Graduate work as in teacher training. And so I said, fine, and my wife and I, whose name is Dorothy, got married that summer when I graduated. And we took the train back to New York and settled at Camp Shanks. Now, Camp Shanks was my POE, which I later left the States from, and or which I had earlier left the States from when I went to Europe. And we had barracks for the GIs there and whatnot. And one interesting thing that happened there was that the auditorium that we used to have all of our lectures in, and all the movies about that they showed the GIs about germs and everything. They while we were there at Camp Shanks, the roof on the auditorium collapsed from heavy snow. We were there during the heavy snow of 1948, where about 2 feet of snow fell on New York City and upper state there in about a 12 to 24 hour time. And it weighted down this auditorium roof, and it just collapsed. So it showed you that they had figured out that what they built for the GIs was only going to last so long. They didn't make it last forever. That was in 48, and of course all this stuff had been built for the GIs in probably 1940, 41.
At what point did you get into the Army?
I was at Santa Barbara, then had started my third year, my junior year, and I was going to be drafted. And so I joined the reserves in the fall of 42, and they called up the reserves in March of 43. So I was activated then, went to Camp Robinson, Arkansas, from Fort MacArthur, where I had been inducted, and took basic training 3 months. Then the opportunity to become a part of ASTP, Army Specialized Training, was there. So I applied, and they sent me down through the University of Louisiana to be processed, and then from there I was sent to the New Mexico School of Mines. And the New Mexico School of Mines is where I took perhaps 9 months or so of training before they then decided that the Army Specialized Training Forces needed to be called up because they needed men. And the war in Europe was underway to such an extent that they knew they would be invading right away, and they still hadn't dealt with Japan completely. So they called us up, and I was from New Mexico. Then I went to Camp Barkley, where the 12th Armored was located, and they, because I like to hike, they put me in the infantry, gave me a rifle, and gave me the training.
What is when you think about those days at Barkley and your training, what is there one event that stands out in your mind, or one person or something?
Well, down there, it was kind of I had already had basic training at Camp Robinson in Arkansas earlier, and that was training was related to the armored forces, and I was therefore, since I was infantry, I was armored infantry, and therefore we related to half tracks and or to the back of tanks. We rode on the back of tanks as well. And it was just specialized armored infantry training, looking forward to deployment overseas, and it wasn't long in coming. No one special interest. I don't think I ever got a leave there, and Abilene was the area that I did get into Abilene once or twice on a bus or something or another, but I didn't get further than that, I know.
Today he's from B Company of the 56th, and I appreciate you coming. So,
Thank
like
you.
I told you, we're going to start out, and I want to know about your family, your parents, and your brothers and sisters, and where you came from.
Well, I was born and raised in Long Beach, California, and lived there all my life until I was long after I was married, and therefore I went through the schools there and have 2 sisters, both of them slightly younger than I am, and the parents had come from Iowa in 1919, and in fact my parents were married March 19th, 1919, and came west. Settled in Long Beach, and my dad was an electrician, and my mother was fortunate enough to be a housewife the entire time.
Give me your dad's full name and your mom's full name.
Rex A. Weller and Jeanette Ellen Weller.
Okay. What was her maiden name?
Leininger was her maiden name. They both came from southwestern Iowa, near the towns of Diagonal and Creston, which is some 90 miles southwest of Des Moines, and came out of a farm setting where their parents were farmers in both cases and had sold their farms and so forth and so on, and they came west.
They were pioneers, huh?
Yeah, they came in about 1920 or 21 up to Seattle, worked briefly up there for a lumber company, and then came down the coast with my dad's parents, and had varying experiences. Came over to Ridge Route in the days when it had all kinds of twists and turns in it, and went as far south as San Diego. And it was raining in San Diego, so they backed up to Long Beach, which they had passed through, and they liked that, and they stayed there. Yep.
Okay, you graduated then from Long Beach. And what year did you graduate, and what were your interests in high school?
Well, I graduated in 1940 from high school, and had been carried papers for the Long Beach Press Telegram, had 2 or 3 routes for several years and whatnot. And my athletic interest was handball at the time, and swimming, which the ocean being right near us, I used to ride the waves and so forth. And that's when they had bodyboards that were long wooden ones, about 11 or 12 feet long and quite wide, remarkably different from what they have now. But anyway, I then went on to City College for 2 years, Long Beach City College. And at the end of that time, I went up to Santa Barbara, which was in the process of becoming a part of the University of California at the time, and was located in Santa Barbara. But they were beginning to build a new school at Goleta, which is about 9 miles north, for the university. So I never attended the university per se, but because it was being integrated at the time with the university from an administrative point of view, my diploma was from the university in 1947 when I graduated. And as I was mentioning to your assistant here, I graduated with a bachelor's in sociology. And one of the professors asked me what I was going to do with it, and at that time, about the only thing you could do with that was become a probation officer, or possibly, if you were intellectually inclined, become a doctorate in sociology with graduate work. But I was not interested that way. And so the professor said, well, I graduated from Columbia University, Teachers College. I just got my doctorate. He says, I have friends back there, and if you'd like to go back there to school, I'll help you get in. Graduate work as in teacher training. And so I said, fine. And my wife and I, whose name is Dorothy, got married that summer when I graduated. And we took the train back to New York and settled at Camp Shanks. Now, Camp Shanks was my POE, which I later left the States from, and or which I had earlier left the States from when I went to Europe. And we had barracks for the GIs there and whatnot. And one interesting thing that happened there was that the auditorium that we used to have all of our lectures in, and all the movies about that they showed the GIs about germs and everything. They while we were there at Camp Shanks, the roof on the auditorium collapsed from heavy snow. We were there during the heavy snow of 1948, where about 2 feet of snow fell on New York City and upper state there in about a 12 to 24 hour time. And it weighted down this auditorium roof, and it just collapsed. So it showed you that they had figured out that what they built for the GIs was only going to last so long. They didn't make it last forever. That was in 48, and of course all this stuff had been built for the GIs in probably 1940, 41.
At what point did you get into the Army?
I was at Santa Barbara, then had started my third year, my junior year, and I was going to be drafted. And so I joined the reserves in the fall of 42, and they called up the reserves in March of 43. So I was activated then, went to Camp Robinson, Arkansas, from Fort MacArthur, where I had been inducted, and took basic training 3 months, then the opportunity to become a part of ASTP, Army Specialized Training was there. So I applied, and they sent me down through the University of Louisiana to be processed, and then from there I was sent to the New Mexico School of Mines. And the New Mexico School of Mines is where I took perhaps 9 months or so of training before they then decided that the Army Specialized Training Forces needed to be called up because they needed men. And the war in Europe was underway to such an extent that they knew they would be invading right away, and they still hadn't dealt with Japan completely. So they called us up, and I was from New Mexico. Then I went to Camp Barkley, where the 12th Armored was located, and they, because I like to hike, they put me in the infantry, gave me a rifle, and gave me the training.
When you think about those days at Barkley and your training, is there one event that stands out in your mind, or one person or something?
Well, down there, it was kind of I had already had basic training at Camp Robinson in Arkansas earlier, and that was related. Training was related to the armored forces, and I was therefore, since I was infantry, I was armored infantry, and therefore we related to half tracks and or to the back of tanks. We rode on the back of tanks as well, and it was just specialized armored infantry training, looking forward to deployment overseas, and it wasn't long in coming. No one special interest. I don't think I ever got to leave there, and Abilene was the area that I did get into Abilene once or twice on a bus or something or another, but I didn't get further than that, I know. Yeah. So then we went overseas, and we were on the Empress of Australia, a big ocean liner, with a huge escort and ships in every direction. So there wasn't any problem, to my knowledge, as we did go over, and landed at Liverpool in England, and got sent down to Tidworth Barracks in kind of the middle southern section of England. And then we were deployed from there over to Le Havre in France. And at the time, Patton had made his dash across France and was bogged down at the Maginot and Siegfried lines. So we were able, our whole division was able to be taken across France with a train and our equipment and whatnot, where it was driven that way. And we got there in the winter of 44. And the first action was in December that we got involved in, which was up near the Vosges Mountains. And on the other side of that is the Colmar and Alsace-Lorraine and so forth. And the Maginot Line had been pierced, and so had the Siegfried Line in certain respects. So we practiced against those lines, and saw immediately that we wouldn't live long if we ever had to go against it as infantry, because they sent us across several fields up against those big concrete pillboxes that even tanks would have had a hard time dealing with. But we were just practicing, and but we never had to do that, and so because they had broken through the lines eventually, and we were able to avoid that experience. So we were fighting to begin with, then in the winter time with snow and ice on the ground, and the first action, the first area that we were dealing with was near the towns of Offendorf and Weiler, and then Herlesheim. And on the 8th of January is when my experience started at Herlesheim to about the 13th or so. That was 5 or 6 days. And the action, as you're well aware, I assume, from having heard others recite things about Herlesheim, was that the waterworks was a central point there. And as we and the waterworks regulated the flow of the Zorn River into the Moder River, which was located there. And there were canals in every direction, and our tanks had a lot of difficulty getting across these passageways, and several of them were in the water and had been knocked out and so forth. So as infantry, we were able to move through. And we moved through to the waterworks and were involved there for a night or two as different phases of the attack began out of there toward Herlesheim. And the 56th then was ordered to attack Herlesheim, which was about 3,000 yards away. And the Steinwall Woods were to our left, and as we started to attack, we came under heavy fire from there, small arms fire, anti-tank fire, mortar fire, artillery fire, and so forth. And the sequence here is fairly specific, so if you don't mind, I'll just read it. A couple of battalions of our 714th Tank Battalion was to the right of the side of the Zorn River, which was right there. And as we attacked, I happened to be right on the bank of the Zorn River, going down, and these tanks were quickly devastated as they were caught in the open field on the left-hand side of the bank. I was pinned down, and the fire was coming from the extreme left, my left, across over my head, over the river, and the tanks were being knocked out across the river. I was pinned down in a slightly depressed area for upwards of 2 hours as a sniper kept reminding me every several minutes that I was being watched. I was a rifleman carrying an M1 Garand, 2 hand grenades, a bayonet, and a bazooka. A bazooka was anti-tank weapon. And to my left, the 88s from the woods would fire, and then I would hear a pop right over my head, because these shells were going right over my head, about 2 or 3 feet high. I'd hear a pop several feet over my head as the shell, which was a red-hot ball of fire, passed. And within a second or so, a sharp report indicated over here on the right that a tank had been struck, and these armor-piercing shells would just go right through the tank, or into it. After several hours of this, and all this firing ceased, and I stopped receiving a sniper bullet every now and then, I got up. There was no one around me. I got up, left my bazooka on the ground, grabbed my M1, and ran along the bank toward Herlesheim for about 800 yards. I spotted buildings of the city on my left, 300 or 400 yards to my left, and no one was firing on me, and no one was visible. I ran toward the nearest perimeter buildings, not knowing what to expect. And as I approached the house, it turned out that elements of my company witnessed my running approach across the field from several of the homes that they had occupied. Others had gotten into the city and were there. Some 20 or 30 GIs from my battalion or company occupied 6 or 8 buildings, and the Germans held the rest of the city. At night, the German tanks roamed the field that I had crossed and all around the town, firing fragmentary and armored-piercing shells through our buildings and setting fire to several of the buildings. So we eventually got down to 2 or 3 buildings. Snipers fired on anyone outside from vantage points such as church steeples and close-by buildings. And after 2 days and nights, our men numbered 14, and we were down to 3 buildings. The first afternoon, at platoon leader Charlie Paschal's direction, I was guarding the front window facing the field that I had run across. And in the late afternoon, I noticed a group of 10 to 20 Germans wearing white sheets to blend in with the snow rise up from a covered trench in the field about 30 or 40 yards away. They began to move toward us. Several of us at the window cut them down with small arms fire as darkness descended. Several hours earlier, I had run over their very hideout as I had crossed the field approaching Herlesheim without being fired on. But I had run right over their trenches, and they were hiding at the time. Additionally, I was lucky in contacting my platoon leader, Charlie Paschal, almost immediately as I entered a building. His rank was in transition from staff sergeant to second lieutenant as a result of a battlefield commission. When I had left him at the waterworks, he was a tech sergeant, and in Herlesheim I heard that he had been made a second lieutenant. Orders came to us at 2,000 hours on the third night that we would be withdrawn from the city under a moving artillery barrage. Well, we had been surrounded. They had been firing through our buildings, and men had been killed one way or another in these respective buildings, either from sniper fire or from tanks, shells that had been going through the place. And we would just sit in the windows and guard as best we could because we knew we were surrounded, basically. At a certain time, at 2,000 hours, we were told by radio that a moving barrage, artillery barrage of our own, would be laid down clear across the field and up along the Zorn River so that we could be pulled out of there or get out. And at 0 hour approached came, we moved our wounded out as we followed along on foot. They had sent in a tank or two of ours down along that river, and we'd put our wounded on the tanks. They moved out. This barrage moved, and there was smoke and everything so that we couldn't be seen. And it was, 2,000 hours is what, 8 o'clock or something at night. And the night was dark and foggy as we steered by each other across the field along the Zorn to the waterworks. And the Germans were apparently unaware of our departure. They didn't bother us, at least. 180 men of my company had attacked Herlesheim 2 or 3 days earlier. If the Germans had known how we were, I assure you they would have promptly crushed us. However, we took the initiative and we let them know that we were there, so they hesitated to move on us. I don't know what happened to the other 160 men. Many were wounded or killed, and some were lost.
Some were taken prisoner. A few may have deserted. Others were eventually regrouped and assigned or reassigned. And that was basically the end of my experience at Herlesheim. We were so tired at the time that they took us out and took us back and put us in a medical facility that was close to the front lines, and they gave us shots. And I remember I slept for 24 hours.
Was the shots to help you all sleep?
Yeah, it was to make us relax.
That was a pretty hard time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was very hard. But anyone that came out of it was lucky, very lucky. Of course, the Germans at Herlesheim was trying to create a salient that would come out of Strasbourg and be a diversionary attack so that the Battle of the Bulge could be won by the Germans up north. But we counterattacked up there. We won the Battle of the Bulge. And as a result, their thrust down here was stopped by our armor. But our armor was stretched thin and was not supposed to be fighting a ground battle, that is, on foot, deployed like we were. And, of course, it was wintertime, and it was cold, and you dig foxholes. I remember at Herlesheim that they, as we start to dig a foxhole at night, before we tacked Herlesheim, we were at the waterworks. We started to dig a foxhole, and the ground was frozen, and you might get 2 or 3 inches down, and every time a shell would come in, you'd put your head down, but it didn't do you any good, of course. And the Germans were in the woods right below us, and my platoon leader, Charlie Paschal, was of Hungarian birth, and he could speak German. So he would yell at the fellows down there, at the Germans, and they would yell back, and they would tell us, that the 4 Fs were home with the women and so forth in terms of our state, and he would yell back in German to them to get lost or something or whatever he said. I don't know what he said in German, but Charlie Paschal's here.
I'm supposed to find him and interview him.
Yeah, he's had more experience than I've had, and he was given a battlefield commission. He was in the Army long before I was, and he received training at Fort Campbell and clear through, and he's several years older than I am. But Charlie is certainly a man that if you have the opportunity to interview him, it'll be because he's doing it because I asked him. He refused to do it, and up until now, and he's been asked a number of times. So I'm happy to make sure you make the contact. Then there's one other type of action here that I need to go over one way or another as we move along. Of course, we crossed the Rhine River, and we had sporadic firing and so forth, and there were a lot of episodes, but none of them exceptionally heavy. We were able to move fast, and we were at that time called the Mystery Division, and we went up the Moselle River with blackout lights to Trier. We were attached to Patton's army at the time, and from Trier, Germany, we went across the Rhineland in 2.5 days and hit the Rhine. And we had action, but we didn't have anything that was, real bad. The Germans were kind of laying back at the time.
Were y'all able to, as y'all went across there, were you able to sleep in half tracks or something? When I think of 2.5 days of that kind of no rest, no sleep, no. How did y'all do that?
Well, as I recall, we stopped briefly, I think, at night once or twice in a village. And whenever we would stop, whether it was there or any place else in Germany, whenever we stopped, we would raid the nearest farm home and get their eggs and potatoes. And we would have something other than GI rations. And we put up a perimeter and protect ourselves at night. But, and pull guard duty in sequence and that type of thing. The excitement of moving fast during the day was such that we were on autobahns and or main highways or whatever they had, and we were cutting through, and all in between were Germans and infantry and whatnot, but we just went right on through with armor, and as a result, when we got to the Rhine, we had to stop until we got across on some bridges, and the men following us, the divisions following us, were largely infantry. They'd clean up in the middle with the prisoners. But of course we were taking prisoners, but as we took them, they would surrender and we'd just send them back along the road. And they would be marching in big columns along the road as we went this way. And the GIs would, every time we'd stop, the GIs would jump off and shake down a few of the prisoners for whatever they had. Watches and P-38s and Lugers and knives and so forth and so on. And they'd get souvenirs that way. I had a P-38 and I had a German paratrooper knife that I took off of a prisoner. But we paid little attention. They had quit at that point, those that we were confronting, and they were just going back and counting their blessings, probably. And we were just moving through them. Well, anyway, Wilhelmsdorf, Germany, was on our route down through toward Bavaria, and was on the pathway toward Nuremberg, Augsburg, and Munich, but wasn't that far. And obviously, Williamsburg, Germany, Wilhelmsdorf is a real German name. And on April the 15th, now see, this goes from the time of Herlesheim, which was around, it finished around January 20th or thereabouts, February, March, April. That's 3 months later. And we had moved all the way from France into central part or southern part of Germany. Well, anyway, the setting is that the division was spearheading through the heart of Germany, the National Redoubt, as they called it, and Bavaria. And as we passed through the town of Wilhelmsdorf, our vehicles, which is called a line of march, when you have them all on one road together, was halted about 200 yards out of town. We went through town and was halted about 200 yards. Several bridges ahead needed repairs, and we waited next to a heavily forested hill to our immediate right. The word came to my squad from Charlie Paschal that his radio assistant and runner had been hit. He needed a medic. Since he was with Charlie was with the men dispersed at the base of the hill, protecting the vehicles in line of march at that point, I was asked to notify medics in the town to our rear of the need for a medic up front. and I began running to the rear along the line of march. I had a squad at the time. I was squad leader at the time. I had been made squad leader after Herlesheim and of the 3rd Rifle Squad, and I had them dispersed on the ground, and they and Charlie asked me to go back, and so. But I was a sergeant. I was not a staff sergeant. Squad leaders are staff sergeants. But at the time that they made me squad leader, they said the war was too close to the end, and they didn't want to have too many ranked persons and too many officers and all this and that. And so they were slow in giving me a staff sergeant, and they never did. But I still held the position. And I ran halfway back about 100 yards across the field and along the line of march, and I drew sporadic rifle fire. I could hear bullets whistling by and kicking up the dirt around me from the hill, which Charlie and the wounded person was at the base of. And I noticed a cluster of GIs kneeling behind a half-track as I ran, protecting themselves, and a wounded man from the random fire. So I stopped, and I noticed that the man had a serious thigh body wound, and the men were all in shock around this half-track as it had just happened. And And the wounded man was their squad leader, who happened to be Howard Toms. I didn't know him, but it turned out to be him. I therefore volunteered to help, since they weren't doing anything and they were in shock. I volunteered to help carry him back to the town, because I was going that way, and some 150 yards to the rear, and if someone would help me. So the squad's assistant squad leader, Freddie Payne, immediately agreed to assist me. We placed Howard between us, and with one of his arms around each of our shoulders and necks, we slowly walked him back to town. Rifle fire continued to harass us from the distant hill about 200 to 400 yards away, but it wasn't accurate fire, obviously. And medics met us at the edge of town. They took over with Howard Toms as I completed my mission of informing the medics of the status of Charlie Paschal's assistant and of the need for medical attention up front. I immediately returned through the line of march to Charlie's location, where I discovered that his assistant had been shot between the eyes as he rose up to scout the forested area. He had a bullet right through his head. I believe he was 18 years old. At this point, Charlie asked me to see what was up the hill, which we were at the base of, next to the road where the fire had been coming from. Well, it was quite a hill going up, and it was all forested. And so I had my squad right there, and for some time I'd been acting as 3rd Rifle Squad leader, with my rank having changed from PFC to sergeant. Technically, squad leaders hold staff sergeant rank. Such rank had been requested for me, but it never came through, as the war ended soon after in Europe, and I heard that they didn't want to be overstaffed. Soon after Herlesheim, I began acting as squad leader. Upon Charlie's request, I directed my squad to disperse behind me, and I led them up through the forested hillside. Well, as we went up through the forested hillside, we just had a rifle at our side. You don't take time to aim or anything. You shoot from the hip. And the hill was about 150 feet high, and it took us about 200 yards to reach the top. Not one shot was fired as we moved up the hill. The Germans were ready to give up as we approached, and as they rose from their foxhole, one after another, and the whole side of the hill was covered with foxholes and Germans. They had their arms up in the air. And leading the way, I passed right through them. A platoon of 40 or 50 men were dug in all together on the hill. At the top of the hill was a flat agricultural plateau extending into the distance. I think it had been plowed, but I'm not sure. We observed a scout vehicle racing away in the distance, and one of the Germans indicated that the vehicle was occupied by 2 or 3 SS troops, and they had held their men on the hill to the very last under threat of death if they didn't resist our approach. Upon my squad's approach, though, through the trees and up the hill, they took off to save their lives. The SS men did. But they had held their men against us to the very end because they were the fanatical ones, and the others were not as fanatical, obviously, at that point. After securing the ridge area, we returned to our tracks at the base of the hill through the same area that we had earlier ascended. We discovered bodies of Germans all the way down. They had not been taken prisoners. Instead, I found out later that buddies of Charlie's assistant, who had been killed, the young boy, earlier, followed us up the hill. His buddies followed us up the hill, killed every one of the Germans, probably 50 of them. And it was a sickening shock to members of my squad and myself to witness the carnage which was triggered by the revenge. My squad and I didn't have that type of orientation that the boys' buddies had. And once we had moved up through, they followed us and they just cleaned up the place. The bridges had been cleared in the meantime, so our line of march continued to attack on down the road. And subsequent events was that on that was April 15th. On April 25th, 9 days after those actions, I was slightly wounded by mortar fire as we were fighting through a town near the approach to the Autobahn to Augsburg and Munich. I was sent back to a field evacuation center for treatment, and so there was no more combat for me. 9 days later, the division was placed in 7th Army Reserve, and on May the 5th, the 12th Armored Division was ordered to assume control of the 7th Army Security Command of the city of Heidenheim, Germany, and on May the 8th, the E-Day, the division was carrying out its orders. I wasn't obviously with them since I was wounded on the 25th. Right after Herlesheim, I had been awarded the Combat Infantry Badge, which you receive $10 a month for in your pay. And Freddie Payne and I later received the Certificate of Merit for carrying out and an oak leaf cluster to the Bronze Star and a V appendage for valor for our earlier action pertaining to Freddie's wounded squad leader, Howard Toms, carrying him out after he had been wounded. And of course I received the Purple Heart for wounds. And I made a statement here that might be appropriate here. I sent a copy of this to Vernon Williams. He has a copy of it. And I now see the value, I said, of a personal history. Until recently, I never thought I'd be up to dredging up the foregoing account from the recesses of my mind, but it's done. And for better or worse now. And after almost 53 years, it hasn't been easy emotionally or factually. And in certain respects, memory fades, but the emotion of trying times remains strong. I had also donated a telegram from my parents that I sent my parents on Christmas of '44, and they saved it, and so I donated it to the museum. And I donated a German paratrooper switchblade knife that I took off of a prisoner. And I also donated a P-38 pistol to a teacher friend who had a gun collection in the early days of my teaching career. And I probably would not have written this if it hadn't been for a friend in Tustin who encouraged me to do it. His name is Jack Miller. And of course I had no intention of videotaping anything, but I got to thinking about it, and after I talked to your people down here today, I thought maybe it would be a wise thing to add it for what it's worth.
Yes, it is. I have a few questions. When y'all went into the towns, could you explain to those of us who haven't experienced that what it was like to go from to take a town? How?
Yeah, well, we were of course, if you didn't meet resistance in your vehicles, if your vehicles didn't meet resistance, then you could drive into the town. But that didn't happen very often. Usually they had an 88 or something sitting there, or else they would put down a mortar barrage on you or something or another that would stop the vehicles, at which point the armored infantry would have to get out of their vehicles, out of our half-tracks, or off of the back of the tanks that we were riding on, and spread out and move into the town. And sometimes we would draw fire, and sometimes we really wouldn't draw fire. And if we got into the town, invariably you would be met by a little old lady or a little old man who were hysterical because the Germans had just been in their buildings or around them, and they had indicated that the Americans would kill them all and that they were to resist them, and that we were lethal. And so they would be more or less hysterical. I remember standing on a number of porches where a woman would be reacting in that type of manner, and I would be saying, "Haben Sie any Eier?" I'd be asking her for eggs. And they would take a double take, and they'd look at it. Eier, yeah. Haben Sie Eier? Yeah. So they would run into their bedroom, and they all kept these crocks like this under their beds with their eggs. And so they would bring a crock or two out, whatever they had, and they'd give it to us. See you later. That was it. And we would move into the town or out around, or if we were stopping there that night, we would take over buildings then, and for sleeping or guarding purposes, or headquarters for our platoon. And then we would put out a guard around the city, and we would draw 4 hours of guard duty, and then we'd sleep, and 4 hours of guard duty and sleep. And usually we weren't counterattacked because going through southern Germany, we were lucky in a way that we had the forces on the run, basically, and we weren't meeting heavy infantry intense resistance. It was resistance when we met it. It was hard enough, but up north, where the heavier fighting was occurring, where our armies were against other armies, and where a large portion of it was not armor, where it was just foot fighting, then it was more intense. And even toward the end of the war, it tended to hold on that way somewhat. But, of course, eventually they caved in.
But that is a dangerous time too, because even though you think you have them on the run, they are still dangerous if they're firing on you, or if they're dropping mortar on you, or artillery, or whatever. It's just like I didn't get wounded until the 25th of April, and that was from mortar fire, and on the outskirts of a little village, and we were about ready. We were fighting for access to the Autobahn, which led to Augsburg, and we hadn't been on an Autobahn yet, and once you hit that Autobahn, then they went from Augsburg to Munich, and they went right on into Austria, and the war was over. And they traveled as much as, our units traveled as much as 30 and 40 and 50 kilometers a day down through there. But they drew fire at times, and they had deaths and whatnot, or we had deaths, but it became less and less. And I wasn't there for that, but they, war isn't over until it's over. And then you might step on something.
Somebody told me this morning, one of the gentlemen said, you always knew when you were going to get shot. There was a premonition.
Well, I don't.
Did you ever feel that?
I don't know. I don't think I ever did. Toward the end of the war, I felt that I'd get a ringing in my head as I didn't know the type of situation, and I just wondered if something could happen, but I didn't feel that it would happen. I just was leery of it happening that close to the end of the war, and after having been through considerable, and what I went through was nothing compared to what the men in the Battle of the Bulge and other places went through, where they were just overwhelmed, where they had no choice. There's no such thing as being pinned down. It was just that the forces came over and just went right over them, and that was it. You either ran out of ammunition shooting at them, or else they were on you before you knew it in numbers that you couldn't cope with. And so there were many a hero there that died. No one knew the circumstances, and so forth. Well, we were fortunate that with armor, you move, you cut through, and basically your most dangerous time comes when you get stopped and you have to dismount, and when the combat infantryman has to clean up anything and go do anything. See, we could have, if they'd been intending, if they had really wanted to, my squad would have been wiped out by 50 men on that hill. We wouldn't have had a chance to have gotten up halfway. But no one fired on us, because at that point, even though the two SS officers or men were up there, whatever they were, bracing their backs against us, they saw the handwriting on the wall at that stage in the game, which was April 25th. Well, see, that was only a little more than 2 weeks before the end of the war. The word was out among the Germans that it was becoming more fruitless, and so you might say I was lucky that when I had to go up a hill that I didn't know what was there, and nothing but trees, and so were all the men on the squad. So there's a lot of intangibles in a war, and it's a free-flowing situation. I just read a book on the Battle of Gettysburg, and it was an excellent book, but I would not have wanted to be in the Civil War. It was hopeless for those men. They didn't receive medical treatment, they didn't have food, they had masses of men against each other, and they went across open fields against each other, and it was just nothing but blood and guts. That was a lot different. And of course Vietnam was a lot different too, where you never knew where the enemy was. So, I can reflect and I can count many blessings.
Can you tell us about when you were wounded, or was you at
Oh, well, I was just wounded lightly by a mortar shell. I still have some metal in one arm, and I was grazed here, right here. And I think Charlie was much the same with different superficial type wounds. But I had nicks in my helmet from bullets, bullet through the canteen on my hip, things like that never hit. But I always was, well, once after Hildesheim, or during Hildesheim, I was leader after a fashion. I had to be out in front. And your earlier question about premonition, we were approaching Nuremberg's walled city, and we never went into Nuremberg. They drew us back, but we were approaching it across the field, and I could see it in the distance, big brick walls all around in front of us, and the city buildings way up behind. And Nuremberg's one of the oldest cities in Germany, and a big one. And we didn't know whether we had to attack or not, but we were approaching it. And I was leading my squad across the fields, and the only person I could see was the other squad leader of another company or platoon or whatever it was, off to my right and another one off to my left, and their squads were behind them. So we, 2 or 3 men, if we looked sidewise, could see each other, but we couldn't see anything else. And there was nothing in front of us, and there was fire coming from in front of us in a rather sporadic fashion. And we went across those fields for 800 or 900 yards at one point. Then all of a sudden we got orders to stop. So they withdrew us, and they decided, I guess, not to attack in that direction anymore. But while we were attacking there, we were the point men, and you don't have any friends out there. But you run and you fire from the hip if you see anything, and as long as you can.
How did the war change you?
Oh, I don't think it changed me.
Did it teach you some things?
No, I've always been pretty much motivated to doing something constructive, and so as soon as the war was over, I continued my education. When I got out of the service, it was in February sometime of '46. The spring semester was well underway, 2 or 3 weeks, and I went up to Santa Barbara and told them I had just been discharged, and they said, we'll take you right now. And so they did, and so I completed the semester, and by June of '47, I graduated with a BA. I went back to get my master's and teaching credential at Columbia, and had that by February of '49, and came back to Long Beach, applied for a job, and was given a 3/5 time job for the rest of the spring semester, and then they gave me a full-time job every year after that. And I had a very good, productive career as an educator, teacher, counselor, and administrator of high schools. So I had nothing to complain about.
So you were a principal at a high school?
I was assistant principal of Milliken High School for the last 6 years that I was involved before I became 60 years old, and as assistant principal of the largest high school in Long Beach, 2,500 students, 300 and some cars among the kids, and plus the faculties. I was in charge of discipline, internal and external, around the campus and internal, and the heaviest discipline. There were other assistant principals that had grade level discipline and that type of thing, but anything heavy I represented them downtown on, where it came to excluding kids for whatever, guns, drugs, or whatever, and fights, and I held a very strong line, and the teachers respected it, and as a result, I figured that when I turned 60, I was eligible for full retirement, had given it the full shot, and was lucky, and so I retired.
Do y'all have children?
I have 4 children, 12 grandchildren. 6 of them boys and 6 of them girls.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you one thing, and then I'm going to let you go. If you were to leave a message for your 12 grandchildren, or their children, going to watch this tape in 20, 30 years, is there something that you would want to leave with them?
Oh, I don't think so. I just hope that that they don't have to be involved in war.
Well, I sure appreciate your time, and I appreciate you talking to Mr. Pitchell?
Peischel. Yeah.
And coming in and being willing to share those.
Mm-hmm.
Those
Well, I appreciate it.
Is there anything that I left out or didn't ask you, or anything that you can think of?
Well, not really.
Okay. I have one thing.
uh,
Okay, I want to ask you one thing. If you were to think back on all of the times that you were in training and in duty and stuff, is there one person that kind of, either one situation that you remember in kind of a humorous way, something funny happened, or a person that was in your platoon, or that kind of kept things light, and any memories of anything like that? Or was it pretty serious?
Well, it was all serious, but I have a lot of respect for Charlie Peischel.
Uh-huh.
He was a real leader. There was one funny thing that happened was that we were south of Schweinfurt, which was a big Air Force place for the Germans. And we were dug in. That's after we crossed the Rhine, and we were in the snow, and we were in a forest, and we were just digging foxholes for the night before we moved on down toward the episode that I indicated, south into Bavaria. Well, anyway, as we were digging foxholes one night, I went right down. I got a foxhole and nothing flat. And everyone around me was digging foxholes real hard. They couldn't get it through the ground. It was snow on the ground and everything else. I discovered in the morning that I had dug mine in a manure pile. Couldn't smell it, and it was covered with snow and everything else, and I wasn't that discriminating, and I just went right down and didn't have any trouble. But the rest, they didn't even get foxholes dug because the ground was so frozen. So we had a big laugh over that. Oh, that was funny.
Well, I sure appreciate your time.
Well, that's great. Well, okay. I appreciate the